bit late. I hadn't heard that anybody else is going to be late, so let's just go ahead and start. Except I got this thing. What am I doing? This is my, I'm so used to my iPad. I'm trying to tap on my laptop screen. Okay. So having called it to order, let's look at the consent agenda. Are there any comments on the May 13th minutes? Is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Unanimous. Let's see, the next meeting is July 8th. I don't see Tanya yet, but I have been in communication with her, so I imagine she'll be on shortly. And there's no Stu, so that's a little hard to do. Are there any other announcements from other commissioners?
I wanted to share that another thing that I learned by listening to the Transportation Commission's meeting is that RVTD and Ashland may be in some ways collaborating on securing funding from ODOT to do a bike share feasibility study. Date yet to be determined as far as I know.
Gary, does this have to do with maybe, again, finding a home for the abandoned one that we had in Ashland?
You know, I'm tangentially still working on that, but my expectation is that the feasibility study will go ahead independent of that initiative. And there's a group called Cascadia Bike Share out of Eugene that the state has basically contracted with to try to launch bike shares in the moderate to small sized metropolitan areas throughout the state. And that seems to be their preferred approach, which makes it somewhat more difficult for an independent entity to make much progress. So I'm not altogether confident that we can make that work locally. It's still not out of the question. It just seems more doubtful than it did before.
Okay. Did RVTD get its funding extended?
You mean at the
I
election?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Okay, seeing Tanya online here, I'd like to back up to council update.
I think that probably the biggest update is that we are out past the budget process now. We have cleared that. And so there's, I think, likely to be at least somewhat more bandwidth in terms of what council might be able to respond to in the weeks and months ahead. There is still a lot of additional budget work that has to be done, and we have a whole slew of additional study sessions that are being put into our schedule starting in August. But you know, the budget and the city's sort of financial situation is a big part of what has been taking up a lot of all of our time for the last couple months. I don't know that there's anything well, the council did put in support for the legislation that Senator Golden has put forward in the Oregon legislature around wildfire and hardening homes and all that sort of thing. So in terms of our adaptation work on SEEP, there's maybe some more resources potentially coming that we might be able to qualify for. And then the last piece is that I've been involved in conversations with Representative Marsh around the REACH codes legislation that has been trying to make its way through the legislature. It's definitely hung up at the moment. It's gotten stuck, but she's been very supportive, and we've just been, continuing to relay the importance of being able to adopt a REACH code if the city wanted to do that. So I think that's all I've got, unless anybody has watched anything that I'm forgetting. Okay.
Thank you. Let's see. Are there any other announcements from commissioners? We had one from Gary before everybody got on. So I saw an email from Gary about the Transportation Commission and a memo that you were proposing to send to them. Has that already been sent, or what's the status of that?
No, I sent that independently as a member of the commission. I did not await the commission's authority. I sent it as an individual member. So that's gone. That's out.
So it has been sent. That was what I was asking. Okay.
Yeah, if there's any comments on that, I'd live to hear them, but probably offline.
Yeah, I'd like to chat with you about it. Let's see. No Stu still.
Gary, I have just a quick question on that. So basically, does it have to do with the differences between how much mode sharing we may focus on for us versus the Transportation Committee?
I think it's a much more complicated set of issues than just that issue alone. It seemed as though there was kind of a lack of understanding of the scope and upon the part of the Transportation Commission, and they saw their role limited to the city's transportation system and not anything having to do with land use or transit, which, clearly the city council hasn't delegated to them any responsibilities related thereto. So clearly that's justified. But obviously, in terms of creating a more transportation efficient land use pattern and a more efficient transportation system generally, those two issues are, a part of the solution, certainly.
Okay. We'll await their response.
Okay. I don't believe there's any other representatives from other commissions nor public forums. Is that right, Elizabeth? Okay.
Rick?
Yes.
In the event that Stu does not come back on, I wanted to just also announce that I haven't seen the agenda yet, but I believe we are going to be looking as a council at giving staff the approval to move forward with the proposal for the USDA loan at the upcoming meeting. And so anyone who would want to, once the agenda comes out, assuming that it's on there, I think it's supposed to be, I think it would be helpful for the council to hear what folks think about that loan program and its potential to help us move forward with our SEEP goals.
Bob?
Yeah, Tanya, do you know what specifically or how much Stu is going to be providing to the council in order to ask for that authority to submit a proposal? Is he going to submit the whole proposal before submitting it to USDA, or is he just providing enough information in order to get the authority to submit a proposal? Because then eventually, if we do get the loan, there'll have to be a subsequent approval by the council, I suppose. Is that right?
Right. Yeah, there will. We have to still accept any sort of funding, whether it's a grant or a loan. But staff needs to get approval before they can actually do the application. Yeah. So I don't know how in-depth that packet is going to be. I know Stu has been working on developing the program, but I don't know how much of that the council is going to be in our packet for this go round. It will be issued. The packet will be out tomorrow at the latest, and so we should know soon. But it's hard to tell at the moment how much detail we'll have.
Gary?
Thanks.
Rick, would it be improper for us to move that you be authorized to write a letter of support to the council on behalf of the Climate Policy Commission?
I'm sorry, were you directing that at me?
Well, I was actually asking Tanya as well as you if we in this meeting could make a motion to authorize you as chairman to send a letter to the council endorsing that authorization and supporting the submittal of the application.
Well, I'm personally fine with that. Did you want to make a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Bob,
Second, sorry.
any discussion? All in favor? Okay. Unanimous.
And Rick, I'm happy to send that along to the council if that's helpful when you have it ready. Either
Yeah.
you can send it in directly or I can transfer it in for you either way.
I will reach out to you to figure that out. Let's see. Well, I see Bridget's on, and one of the things I imagined that Stu was going to talk about was the induction cooktop project. So maybe you could just comment on that, Bridget?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was sent out an email the other day, but it's for the permanent installation. It can be a cooktop or a range, and for commercial or residential accounts. So that's brand new. And then we're donating 3 sets to the Library of Things, so people can check them out and test it out beforehand. So that's exciting. We also updated the e-bike program to be a permanent incentive program. So now we're allowing class 1 and class 2 bikes, and the incentive amount is changing from $300 to $200. So that's already in effect.
What's the limit going to be for the purchase price?
It's still at 3,000.
Okay.
I think that's all. Oh yeah, Bob.
Yeah, Bridget, were you able to find any restaurant that has induction cooktops that, you know, since it turns out Masala doesn't have?
Oh, really? Okay.
No, I haven't. So if you all know, if you come across anything or have any unique ideas for how to do some more educational outreach around that, please feel free to let me know. I know you guys aren't the outreach commission, but I'm sure you all have good ideas just as well. Because I'll be doing more outreach.
I'll check Oberon's because I think that Andy also had told me Oberon's was, so I'll have to look and see.
Okay.
But I haven't ducked my head in there, but I did duck into the new Northern Italian restaurant La Bricola, and they've got gas, unfortunately.
Oh,
Okay, so the only other
But
thing
I do have to say that picture that you have in the on the website is beautiful. That is just one really beautiful induction stove.
Yeah, I recognize it. Thank you for showing it to me, Bob.
I get it. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, I want to tag on to that. I did a survey of all the new climate pages, and I think an excellent job was done by staff. And so I want to give them a big thumbs up for that.
thank you.
Yeah, I think it's really clear on the incentives that are available. You can just scroll down and look at them. You know, it's very, very easy to read.
That's great. Thanks.
Okay. I think we need to move on to old business. We actually do need to have a chair and vice chair election. Having watched a few other commissions go through this process, apparently the norm is to see if there are volunteers first. So does anyone want to volunteer to be the chair? Yeah, I will.
I think the
I was
problem is
about to volunteer you.
we already have a great chair. I don't want to, you know.
I move to nominate Rick Barth as chairman.
Well,
Second
apparently
that.
we are allowed to do this all in one fell swoop in one motion.
Good, okay.
And so is there a volunteer for vice chair?
Oh, come on, guys. All right.
Okay,
Is
now
that
I'm looking
other
for a
arm behind your
motion.
back?
Okay, I moved for Rick Barth for chair and Jeff Wyatt for vice chair.
Second,
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we're unanimous. I assume that I came from Chris because I can't see you.
Yes, it did. I'm sorry. I've been in transit. I'm arriving at my office here shortly, and I'll be on video in a moment.
Very good. Thank you, Chris. Let's see, I think Gary is on for recording action items. And, oh, I want to comment on that. The intent is that you just directly send them out. Don't send them to me or Elizabeth for review. Just do it. Because the whole point of having this is for it to be timely rather than for me to sort of update my processes.
right.
Is there a volunteer for July? I think you're muted, but I saw you raise your hand, Jeff.
Yeah, I say it's probably about my turn again.
Okay, you're on. Let's see, commissioner recruitment. Is there any new news? Otherwise, I will simply point out that there are 2 open places on the commission. And if anybody out there is listening, please do apply. Okay. Seeing no other news on that, we'll just move on. Ray, formal planning.
Okay, on the docket, we still have for July council meeting and adoption for the storm drain master plan, and we provided input for that. Also, there's the TAP plan. Scott's not quite sure he'll have everything aligned between the 3 cities by 7/20, so we'll see what happens there. I did, however, exchange some emails from him about some comments I had made about the increased usage for TAP in the future and the need for a climate study to assess the viability of that. And I think what he prefers to do is keep that independent with Ashland. He did put in some money into a CIP project for the water management and conservation plan. I think it was 150K for a climate study. And I think I'm fine with that approach rather than embedded in TAP. He kind of wants to keep TAP related to the agreement between the 3 cities. However, he will be looking at, in that study, all water sources for Ashland, including TAP, and folding a updated climate study into that. So I could send out a note for that to the commission, just showing the exchange we had. But I think that's where we are in terms of getting that TAP document updated. And
Well, yeah, let me ask a question about that.
yeah,
Is the climate study focused just on TAP, or is it generic across the whole basin?
no, it's generic for all sources for Ashland.
Okay.
Right. That was our comment for the water conservation and management plan. And so he put some money into his CIP that he just went forward with a month ago or 2 months ago for that study by 2023. And I just mentioned to him with the TAP, you kind of need a study as well to include Little Butte Springs and the Rogue River, right, in terms of understanding the capacity to manage the increased usage expected from TAP in the future.
Right. Okay.
So, you know, he thinks where that should go is in each city's water conservation plan. But we're signed up, well, if he gets the money, we're on plan to do it for Ashland, looking at all of our sources, all of our 3 sources for water.
Right. Although it seems like regional approach might be more efficient. Anyway,
Yeah, it does. And I suggested that to him.
anyway, if you would either just collect them and send it off to the whole commission or summarize or however you want to.
Yeah, why don't I do that? Because water is a big topic these days. And I think it is responsible for us to be able to see into the future and try to get the best estimate we can on the flows we're going to have.
Gary?
Oh, so I've recommended that we forward a recommendation to the city council on the DLCD's climate friendly and equitable.
Oh, yeah. Hang on a second.
Oh,
That's the
I'm
next
sorry.
agenda item. I
Oh,
thought you had your hand up about,
No,
I just want to be
sorry.
sure that we're done with the previous one.
Sorry, no.
Is there anything else related to the formal planning?
No, there's
Great.
nothing beyond that on the docket for approval at this time. Just those two,
Okay, very
near
good.
term.
Bob?
I guess I have a question, and maybe this is for Tanya. I'm not sure. I've been having a number of conversations recently with people about water pricing. People talking about how water is so water rates are going up and everything. And I've made the observation that I moved here from a couple of years ago from a place where water is not scarce. In Washington, D.C. area, Maryland, we get a lot of rain. We'd have no problem with rainwater, and water rates are about twice what they are here. And I wonder, I know that with, water rates are set in accordance with the cost of, disinfecting it, making it potable, transporting it, and all those things. But I wonder if part of the rate setting is also an economic analysis on the scarcity and conservation, incentives for water. Do you know if that's who does that? That wouldn't be obviously the CPC, but I'm wondering where in the city that would happen. Would that be part of the ad hoc water committee? Where does that happen, or do we just eliminate, just forget about any kind of sense of need to conserve water in the pricing structure? Does that make sense? You're muted. You're muted.
I think it makes sense. I think I understand your question.
Okay.
The way that we get to the rates is by taking the master plans and the CIPs that are in those master plans, and then we hire a consultant to do a rate study that says, if you're going to keep up your system at an appropriate level, what are you going to have to collect from your ratepayers? And they take into account trends in ratepayers and trends in construction and all that sort of thing. And that's where we get these numbers from, that council then is asked to approve a certain percentage increase from time to time. In terms of the conservation, the way that I understand it is that those conservation folks live inside the enterprise funds. So, the water conservation folks are part of the water utility. But we're not doing anything in terms of setting rates to try to push people to conserve water. We are regulated in certain ways to make sure that we are gathering up enough money to keep the system moving, but that money has to be spent within that system. It can't be transferred to any other system. So there's some checks in that place. I don't know if that quite answers your question, but I know there is a big conversation in the community about the price of water. And particularly since our water rates are higher than other water rates, our electricity rates are really not, but water is more expensive. And I've asked Scott Fleury about that. And part of it is that we have to maintain a dam. Medford doesn't. Medford gets its water from springs, and then it gets it from the main stem of the Rogue River. And neither one of those require the maintenance and the work to maintain a dam and to pump the water like we have to pump it from a variety of different places and set up tap and all the sorts of things that we do. But he gave me a sort of a rundown of the other reasons too why our water is a bit more expensive, and I think that would actually be helpful to get that information out to people, because there is a big conversation happening about it.
Thanks, Tanya.
Yeah, Ray, we haven't finished your topic yet, so go forth.
Okay, yeah, and also we all know that there's a proposed new water treatment plant. So that'll be driving some of the capital costs going into our water rates.
Yes, in fact, that's been driving some of our rates for many years leading up to this point, so that there wouldn't be a major rate hit when we rebuilt that system. So we still shouldn't see a major jump that we would typically see when starting a project of that size, but we will continue to see increases in the rates in order to accommodate it.
Okay, Ray, you're done. I guess I'm not hearing anybody else on that topic. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Gary?
So if folks have any questions on the substance of this agenda item, then we can talk about that. But the issue that I wanted to explore with the commission is whether we as a commission can send these comments directly to the Land Conservation and Development Commission and their associated department, rather than having them flow through the city council. It occurred to me that staff frequently offers comments on different state regulations independently of the council. And I was thinking that maybe that would be appropriate for us. Certainly, we could also forward to the council a recommendation for them to endorse our suggested changes, but it seems to me that we need to make sure that the state knows that we think there are specific changes that need to be made, and we should share them with them as a commission. Does anybody have insights into whether we are authorized to do that without the council's review?
I don't, and I actually think this is something that staff ought to research and come back to us on.
Yeah, I would just chime in that I understand that the council can send in for things and staff can send information in on behalf of the city, but I don't believe that commissions have that authority. And so, but we should double check it. I think I'm not 100% clear on that.
Okay.
Yeah, I was looking at the same question. I was kind of looking at the rulemaking. There's nothing in the rulemaking memo from the state asking for input that really lays out who can provide input, whether it's only official bodies or whether it's, the public at large. And if it's the public at large, we're not quite the public at large, but we're somewhere, we are kind of the public at large.
Right.
We're kind of a special body.
Right.
The issue is not so much them receiving it as whether, as a commission,
Right.
we've been anointed
Exactly.
to do that kind of thing, representing the city. And,
Bob, I
doubt
Bob,
it.
and
Let's check.
Bob, in answer to your question, the state is certainly soliciting comments from anyone and everyone. So if you have perspectives that you would like to share, certainly do that. But I'm hoping that the city can make some official recommendation, whether it's through the CPC or through the council. So do we?
Or are you intending to provide kind of an overview? If not, I'm not particularly encouraging that because I think we've all read it.
I'm not planning to do that.
And I have a number of questions, but I'd like to defer if there's anybody else that has questions of the document that Gary brought forward. I'd like to hear those first. See, I'm not seeing anybody jump up here, so let me just start. It wasn't clear to me where the document came from. Did you write this by yourself, Gary, or is it collaboration or what?
No, it's my work.
Okay. Lost my, here. And is this something that you've been coordinating with the Transportation Commission or anybody else? Or
I have not
starting
coordinated.
here?
I have not coordinated with anyone but the members of this commission.
Ah, okay. So let me comment on the content. It's incredibly specific and very detailed.
That it is.
So even for someone like myself, who's probably a little bit more accustomed to this particular topic than all of the counselors, it's hard to wrap my head around it, all the specifics of it, and whether it all makes sense to the point where I could say, yes, this makes sense, let's send it in, or no, it doesn't. I just don't know. And so my expectation would be if we sent something like this to council, it would take significant staff work if this was the only thing that was in place from the commission to provide the background for them to make an intelligent decision on whether to support it or not. So it seems like Stu would be a key person to inquire how it would be brought to council and how much effort it would be. But unfortunately, he's not here right at the moment. And then finally, I saw that you said fall 2021, I believe is when LCDC is accepting commentary and going to move forward with the rulemaking. I believe that was in the document.
Right. They expect to adopt it in early 2022.
Right, but my understanding is that they close off, certainly public, much sooner than that. My understanding was it was this fall. And so I'm trying to understand what timeline this commission and council would have to maintain in order for this all to be sent forth as a recommendation from the city.
That is also a reason that I think it's important to try to move it ahead through our commission as expeditiously as possible, because it will require some time to get through the city council process. They've got a lot of issues before them, and they seem to be having some difficulty addressing them. So, you know, if we're to get this on their agenda, it seems as though it will have to happen very soon, or it won't be timely.
Ray?
Did we determine it has to go through council, or can it go through staff as well?
Well, I think that was an open question, and
Right,
since our
right,
principal
so-
staff member isn't here, I don't think we're going to be able to resolve that
Okay.
today.
Gary, I had one question on it. It seems like one of the recommendations is to limit minimum off-street parking, but the other recommendation is increased EV charging. To me, in some way, those are running up against each other.
It's,
Because the EV charging has to be off-street, doesn't it, pretty much?
I don't really know whether
Okay.
that's how to answer that question.
Well, I can give some background in that there are cities that have decided to put charging on the street. So it's not impossible to do that. I think it's just a question of whether Ashland would choose to do so or not. And since we own our own utility and that sort of thing, it seems like it should be possible. Whether the council would actually decide to do that is another thing entirely.
Well, in some ways, I think it makes it a little harder to do it versus a dedicated area where cars are going to park, but okay.
Gary, I appreciate the effort you put into this. It's very comprehensive and a deep dive into a big issue. So someone like me, I go through it. I didn't see anything that I object to, but I'm not sure I have the expertise to really comment on anything other than a few bits and pieces meaningfully.
That is certainly the challenge of state rulemaking, is that really there are very, you know, in the scheme of things, few people that have the background to have experience with the existing rule to understand what's needed to actually move us forward into a carbon-free transportation system and to be able to advance ideas that might help us to get there. I don't, minimize the complexity here. And yet I think that this is probably, in the scheme of things, one of the most important actions that the CPC can take insofar as if these regulations are changed, they may have the effect of reducing emissions from all metropolitan areas within the state at a rate that would otherwise not be possible. So, it certainly isn't limited to Ashland in terms of its scope, but our reach could be extended as a commission to, statewide level. And I think that's an important thing for us to undertake if we have the capacity to do so.
So what action do we need to take today on this agenda item?
Well, I think based upon what Tanya said, we have to determine whether we have independent authority to forward these comments to the state. And if not, possibly we can ask staff to forward them to the state as an alternative. And I believe that it is important for us at least to share this information with the council so that they understand the possible direction that state rules will take in the not too distant future that will affect the city's transportation system. And I think that's, again, we're out in large part feeling like an island in terms of our work to try to reduce carbon emissions. Other cities in the state have different levels of effort, but I think we're one of the few that have a carbon or a climate and energy action plan, and are actually having a commission that tried to move it forward up. So again, by sharing this information with the council, we serve to educate them and to highlight the importance of transportation as a part of achieving the goal of SEEP.
Tanya, do you have any comment on what we should be doing here?
The question really comes down to whether it has to be staff or council that puts it forward. And so it would seem that moving it forward from this commission and requesting that at least that staff move it forward in whatever is the most appropriate way would be a way forward today. And then if staff can submit it themselves, then they can, look at it and see if that makes sense to submit. If they have to run it through council, they can then start it up the chain.
It seems like the most that we can do today. I have to agree with Jeff. Everything I saw in there is consistent with the policy direction that this commission has already decided upon. And so moving it forward to the state makes sense to me. But other than that, what Tanya would just propose seems like the most that we can do today.
Well, that I think would be a good move. I would, assuming that there's a motion and a second, we move it forward. I would see that the second issue of whether we as a commission have the authority to comment on state level issues being another task that someone needs to take on.
Yeah, no, if you want to write down that I'm going to talk to Stu about that,
Okay.
I will do so.
Great, thanks, Rick.
Do you need anything formal, Rick, from us that says that the commission is backing the recommendations that Gary has put together?
Yes, that's the other part of
That's
it.
the next
The
piece, right?
informal part is just finding out what our authority is, and I
Yeah.
can just do that. But whether this commission wants to request staff and or council to move it forward is something that we should have a formal motion for.
Yeah.
And I think we're at the point where we either have one or we're going to just move on. So somebody needs to put something on the table or.
Okay, I guess, how about this? I move that the CPC endorse the recommendations that are before us for forwarding to the state rulemaking body via the appropriate route, whether it be staff or city council, to be determined by staff.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in
I
favor?
just, I just,
Go ahead, Bob.
let me just say, I guess, by way of discussion, it seems like this is eminently consistent, if while not contemplated per se in all of its entirety in the SEEP, that is entirely consistent with the spirit and content of the SEEP as far as it goes, and so in that sense, it seems to be within the jurisdiction of this commission to opine on it and to provide this kind of thing going forward.
Absolutely, I agree with that. Ray,
We need to put a timeline on this, Gary, because you mentioned that this closes.
I would, I think if Stu presumably will do what he needs to do to move it forward as expeditiously as possible, but certainly by early fall, we should finalize this and get it out to the city's burner and up to the state. So,
yeah,
but
I think that the scheduling part of it, I can handle informally as well.
okay.
Okay.
So I'll move that forward. Gary, you might want to write that down too.
Okay.
So we have a motion on the floor. So Ray, unless you were proposing amending the motion, is there any more discussion on it?
No, I think informal, just making people aware that there is a time limit to this is fine.
Okay.
So we can go with Bob's motion.
Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor? I don't have to ask for opposition because it's unanimous. Very good. Anything else on this, Gary?
Nope.
Okay. You are up next. Vision Zero resolution.
I don't know whether any of you had the opportunity to listen to the Planning Commission meeting recording, but I did, and it was very discouraging. I'm not sure whether the commission members had adequate opportunity to review the document or whether they only focused on selected sections.
Gary,
excuse me.
the Planning
Okay,
Commission or Transportation Commission?
Let me back up.
Okay.
Up, please. Let me start all over again. The Vision Zero resolution came before the Transportation Commission last month. The original resolution had been prepared by the chair, and as a part of the commission's discussion of the draft resolution, they removed references to climate change, mode shift, and focused exclusively on safety. And as we all know from reading the lower speed limits in Ashland report back in, I guess that was February, I think, January and February, we know that potentially at least there's substantial climate benefits from mode shift. And what this memo that I prepared in draft form for the CPC's consideration is to basically tell the Transportation Commission that we feel strongly that these other matters should be a part of the resolution, in part to help to diversify and expand the interest groups that might support Vision Zero, because there are, again, a multitude of benefits associated with going in that direction that are far beyond just safety. I think the CPC has two choices, maybe three. One is wait until the Transportation Commission approves the draft resolution, which they intend to do at their meeting in June, which will then be forwarded to the CCOC as well as the CPC for endorsement. At that time, we could choose not to endorse it because it doesn't include those matters that we think are important. Or alternatively, we could endorse that resolution knowing that there's a long walk to get to our ending point, which is 2050. And we can afford to kind of set aside some of our priority issues in order to make progress. Alternatively, we could just simply say, no, we aren't interested in supporting the resolution, and that's the end of it. And the Transportation Commission can take it to the council, and the council would make its determination accordingly. Or thirdly, we can forward this memo or something akin to it and inform the Transportation Commission that we really feel that the broader menu of issues need to be articulated in the resolution in order to ensure that people understand that it isn't only about safety. Is there a preference among the commission members?
Jeff?
Gary, do we understand their logic behind narrowing the scope of this initiative?
I believe I can share their logic. It's really that as a Transportation Commission, their central focus is on safety. And they're concerned that to include other tangential issues may serve to oversell the benefits of safety. For us, or at least according to the 2020s report that we reviewed back in January, there are substantial benefits to safety. We can see about it, if with a 5% reduction in speed, we can see roughly a 5% increase in mode share. That translates into a specific, that translates into a 5% increase in walking and bicycling, which has the effect generally of reducing emissions by about 5%. Similarly, without incurring the high costs of owning and operating an automobile, there are substantial monetary benefits to households who make that choice. So that safety, the improved safety of the transportation system and the adoption of alternative modes by residents here would have a multitude of benefits other than simply saving lives and saving the costs of hospitalization, injury, and damage to motor vehicles and others. And the Planning Commission or the Transportation Commission chooses to focus only on the safety side of it.
Doesn't the CEAP have language that essentially requires other commissions and city staff to consider climate change in all of their actions?
I think we need that is an issue that we still have with the city council. It is, I think, even a further stretch for us to apply that standard to other commissions, at least at this juncture, until the city council does it and basically models that behavior. I think we would be hard pressed to convince the Transportation Commission that under the CEAP, they're obligated to do that. But certainly that could be added to the memo to say, hey, listen, there's authority for you to reflect this in your resolution. I would just say that this is kind of the cakewalk of inter-commission collaboration. And we're trying to develop a working relationship with the Transportation Commission, and similarly have them join us in our efforts to address climate change. So it isn't clear to me what the best path forward is, given that we're really in the early stages of building a working relationship with them, and we don't want to adversely affect that through anything that we do unless it's essential to our purpose.
Yeah, I want to interject here for just a minute. It's not specific to the topic at hand, but I did listen to both the Transportation Commission recording as well as the most recent CCOC meeting. And I think it's fair to say that there's a lot of confusion about what's coming from CPC and what the expectation is for what we want back from them and what channel those should go through. And so what I would like in the generic sense, not just for this issue, but because Gary, you've been key to those relationships up to date, is for you and I to have an offline chat about that and to then engage probably with the chairs of those two commissions. And I think we need to straighten out how this process issue is working, quite aside from the content.
I don't disagree with that, but I think the resolution is, again, a somewhat separate matter because.
Oh, I'm not disagreeing with that.
Okay.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want everybody to understand that
Right.
that's the context we're operating in.
Right.
And to expand on that just a little bit more, I would say both those commissions, because of the confusion, were reacting negatively in ways that were really not necessary if they had really understood what the situation was. There was some perception at both of them. CPC was basically trying to tell those other commissions what to do, and that created a negative environment. And so I'd like for us to try to straighten that out.
So back to the.
So I just want to interject that context. And I think you've laid out the appropriate options for what this commission could do. And so now I want to throw the ball back in your court, Gary, to try to drive a discussion towards what is this commission going to do tonight.
Right.
Bob?
Yeah, thanks. Gary, I think I heard you say that the Transportation Commission intends to review finish their work on this matter at their next meeting, and then after that, send it to both the CPC and the CCOC for our comments or for our endorsement or for something, so that we would have an for our endorsement. So we would have an opportunity in considering our endorsement to add some of the climate specific and affordability specific points that you made. Is that correct?
It is, but I would suggest that it's a little more, it's a question of timing, right, Bob? Whether we try to get out front of the issue or whether we know that it'll happen when it happens. Anyway, are you there, or did I lose my connection?
No, I heard you. I didn't quite understand it because
yeah. Let me restate it. It's really a question of timing. Do we try to inform them early on that we have these expectations, or do we act more passively, wait for their action, and then subsequently respond back that we feel strongly, or whatever the commission might embrace, that these changes need to be made? And I concluded at least that there was some advantage to advising them beforehand so that there's an opportunity for dialogue. The best way that we could probably handle this, if Rick were willing, is to basically ask for time on the Transportation Commission's agenda to share with them our concerns about the draft resolution and articulate why we have those concerns. And, you know, do it somewhat less formally than sending them a memo. Again, we're trying to build a relationship with them. Commissions and their meeting structure isn't the most conducive thing to building collaboration, but that's our challenge.
Yeah,
Is building.
I agree with all that, and to the extent my preference matters, I'd rather not send the memo because of all this other context. My preference would be more or less what I stated in the generic, but even specific to this, that Yuri, you and I talk to both the CCOC and the TC chair and figure out how we should move forward in a collaborative fashion. Ray?
Yeah, I think I agree with that approach. And Gary, you are correct that there is in the SEEP a cross-cutting strategy for consideration of climate action goals within the scope of every appropriate city advisory commission. So we're just acting on that. Right. And the other thing is, I just wanted to make sure in your letter, in the middle of it, you want the addition of 3 items, I think it was, into the. Mm-hmm. Okay, so those are the 3 that are of consideration you're focusing on.
Well, those are the ones that I presumed, and again, you know, it's our CPC memo, right? So I made the presumption that these would be 3 things that the CPC would find necessary to be included in order to endorse the resolution. But, you know, I clearly can only speak as a member of the CPC. Our meeting today is our effort to try to figure out what we want to say as a commission. I would say though, Rick, that I have absolutely no, or I have a very low expectation that the Transportation Commission will be interested in adding back anything to that resolution. So, talking with Linda, who was the author of the original draft, may help to improve, kind of our collective relationship, but I don't see it as being a step in having the resolution changed.
I understand that, but we're actually starting to run over schedule here, and we have a lot of other stuff to do today. And so I've made an informal proposal for how we're going to proceed on this. If there's not an objection to that, I'd at least like to see the heads nod in the right direction. And that's the marching orders I will take from this. So unless there's an objection or a specific proposal to do something different, I like to just leave it there and move on.
Okay, you now have 3 tasks.
I'm quite aware that it's all landing on Rick's plate, but that's okay. These are all coordination things that I think are appropriate for the chair. Okay. Okay. The next item that is on the agenda is adaptation. However, Tanya has proposed that we switch the order of the next 2 agenda items because she has some things that she thinks might affect our discussion of the adaptation that are related to the SEEP update strategy. So if there's no objection to that, my intent is to do at least the SEEP update strategy and then come back to adaptation depending upon the contents of that. Anyway, I want to defer the adaptation. So if there's no objection, I want to move on to the SEEP update strategy. Jeff is to lead our discussion on this, although there has been because of all the various requirements imposed on the commission with respect to public meeting rules. We have unfortunately not all been able to talk about this. So I have only found out today that there have been multiple unsynchronized efforts going into this. So we need to first find out what everybody has been thinking and bring that forward, and then have a discussion about how the commission as a whole wants to move forward. So I put Gary's document first in the packet, but I think I'd like to just turn it over to Jeff to lead this portion of the discussion.
Okay, thanks, Rick. I thought that to put some structure around this and kind of force us to make some decisions, I would walk through a series of questions. And part of these are purely semantical so that we all can agree on terms and move forward on that basis. So I'm going to walk through this. I've got 5 questions. I'm going to read through these and then asked you to wait, and after I finished all 5, so you know the whole context of the discussion, then we'll go back to question 1 and have a discussion. So number 1 is and this is our definition of terms. So I'm asking you to define the term SEEP update. I use that in quotes, SEEP update, to mean a formal written update of the Climate and Energy Action Plan that would require community input and council approval. So this is purely definitional. So from here on out, when we talk about SEEP update, we're talking about a very formal process. Question number 2, can we agree to use the term CPC update, again in quotes, CPC update, for any interim CPC reporting in written or verbal presentations to the council? There's been confusion when we're talking about which of those we mean. So we're trying to formalize the definition. Okay, number 3, question 3, can we agree that CPC will provide a CPC update to the council this year, but not a SEEP update? Question number 4, the SEEP is divided into 6 focus areas, and a number of the things that we're working on are kind of cross-cutting across multiple focus areas. For example, when we're talking about electricity, that impacts buildings, transportation, consumption, public health, and safety. So the question is, can we agree that CPC will avoid confusion with the SEEP by using the term initiatives rather than focus areas in our work organization and interim reporting? So this conforms to the priorities that we've already agreed to. We're just going to call them initiatives from here on out. So Rick and I are proposing the following 5 initiatives: formal planning, clean buildings, the path off natural gas, energy efficient transportation, and sustainable electricity. And then the final question is, can we agree to prepare a high-level document that we call the CPC update that includes short summaries of each of these 5 initiatives? Some people have called this an elevator pitch document. And then that high-level document will be supported by working documents in each of the initiatives and updated when deemed necessary. So that's a once through. So let's go back to the question number 1 and open it up for discussion. Can we agree to define the term SEEP update formally, written update of this SEEP that requires council approval? Go ahead, just free for all, please.
I guess I'm wondering, does any updates to the SEEP need to be done with community input? Or now that we have the commissions, is that adequate? I'm not saying that we don't do it, but is it a requirement?
It may or may not be, but again, the question here is, a formal update of the SEEP, how we define that term. So any objections to this definition?
I'm trying to get my head around, I'm a visual person more than an auditory person. So I'm trying to understand what it means. So if we call this, and what is it that it clarifies in your mind by creating this vocabulary term? I guess is my question.
I think we've, for many months now, we've kind of wrapped around the axle in our discussions because people have different definitions of what that means. For example, when Stu goes to the city council, is that a SEEP update? When Rick provides an update in September to the city council, is that a SEEP update? And what we're saying is no, that is not a SEEP update. A SEEP update is a very formal rewrite, if you will, of the document. Those other ones are, it's a staff update on climate change, or in Rick's case, it's a CPC update.
I think it also came up, Tanya, because we know at some point this commission was on the hook to do a SEEP update. And so
Right.
differentiating what we're working on.
Yeah, and I've been having some conversations with Adam too, trying to get clear on what is it that we're required to do, and there is some confusion in there. So that's what I'm trying to understand. Is just I appreciate that we're trying to clarify our language so we know what we're talking about, and then we know what we're required to do. And so if we made this the SEEP update, if we made this, if I've got this right, Jeff, the SEEP update means the formal update process that follows the greenhouse gas emissions assessment, right?
Yes.
Then
Yes.
that puts it over in a particular place, and then we don't mix it up with the rest of what we're talking about. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Gary.
I think Jeff, you know, the formality of an SEEP update, taking a written form and being a certain format, those kinds of things seems very appropriate. The only issue is whether it includes a extensive public involvement process. I could see a SEEP update being, you know, almost a technical update at some future point in time, which may not, in fact, require a full-blown public outreach and public hearing process. So it's really just that part of it that I have any real question or issue about.
And Gary, we can kick that can down the road, because question number 3 was, we're going to provide a CPC update this year. We're not going to provide a SEEP update.
So if I can, I love it when we talk about things that are not, we don't use the same language when we put them in different places. It's my understanding that the city code talks about a 3-year cycle for a comprehensive review, but not an update. So if that's what we're talking about, that if what you're saying, Jeff, is the CPC update is essentially the comprehensive review, then I wonder if maybe we should call that a comprehensive review and not call it a CPC update. Just leave it as, here's the SEEP update, this big, much more formal process. We're coming this year with our review, which is required by code. And I've gotten some information from Adam that I'm happy to share at whatever point it's appropriate about the fact that we have quite a lot of latitude in what that looks like.
I'm certainly not married to these terms, but what I'm looking to do is differentiate and have us all agree on what terms we're going to use and what they mean. So if that's a better term, I'm certainly.
No, I think Tanya's come up with another item, work item.
Yeah, I think
As
it's,
long as my name's not attached to it.
Yeah, Bob.
yeah, I think it might be useful to, Tanya said, offered to share some of the information gathering that she embarked on. So on the comprehensive review, because we've been talking about the code and what the code requires. So and it does talk about a comprehensive review and never mentions a SEEP update. So it'd be interesting to hear what Tanya has uncovered. Maybe this, and I would suggest that maybe this is the right time before we talk about, adding something else.
Sound okay?
Yes, please.
Okay. So what he said is that he feels like the CPC has wide discretion on this question. If we think that the document needs to be fully revetted, updated, modified, we can go that route. We could also make a recommendation to council that the document remains viable and is not in need of any major review or overhaul. We could also provide some hints at what we think might need to be addressed before the next actual update cycle. When it's going to be updated, what are some things that we think need to be kind of taken on in the meantime in order to make that update happen? And so, there's sort of three different ways that we can go about responding to our mandate in terms of reviews, updates, that sort of thing this year. But he didn't think that, he said, we could, depending on where we think the SEEP is in terms of its need for revision, we can put forward a number of different pieces to council that would all meet the needs.
Any thoughts, Rick?
Well, what I'm hearing is that staff's opinion is that we are not compelled to do one thing or another. And then particularly as a still newly formed commission, that's how I still view it. We are still setting precedent, that it is up to us to determine exactly what the powers and duties mean. I think it's also the case that we're still in extraordinary circumstances. We're still limited to 2 hours a month where we can actually talk to each other, more or less, 2.5. And so I think we need to stay focused on what is the most productive way to achieve the goals of SEEP 2017. And although I had expressed hopes that we could thread the needle and try to do everything all at once in January, as I've reviewed the material since last August through January till now, I have concluded that that isn't possible. We don't have the bandwidth. And so I think we are still in the position, given what we've now heard indirectly from staff through Tanya, that we need to just figure out what we want to do and do it.
Yeah, the other thing I would add is, did I
I
interrupt
just
someone?
wanted to say, Stu is here. I'm on the phone tonight, so I just wanted to chime in case there's any need to ask me anything. That is all. Thank you.
Perfect. The one thing, the other element of this is that the SEEP itself does call for these updates, but they link them to the development of the updated greenhouse gas inventories. And so, I think that that's one of the things that we could choose to say that we've looked at. We take a look. We have been looking at the SEEP to see what sorts of updates are needed. If we don't think it needs a major overhaul at this point, we simply say this is we're carrying forward with the plan as it is, and then there needs to be a greenhouse gas assessment update in order to start any sort of major updating process anyway. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think a big part of what we've been struggling with is, and that was the genesis of the priorities, which I'm now trying to call these initiatives, so that we can develop work plans in each one of these areas and have clear responsibility. So who is the lead on formal planning, for example? I mean, that's obviously Ray. It's not clear who the sustainable electricity. There will be 2 or 3 of us working on that. Who's the lead? What's the work plan? What's the schedule? And so we've really gotten hung up about the SEEP update and how all these things fit together. And it's been a distraction from actually working the issues and trying to go after the low-hanging fruit.
But
Right.
Actually, I kind of like the idea of the SEEP review, especially if that's what's codified, because it's up to us to say we've reviewed it and this is what we're going to do. So maybe we do owe the city or the council some, in our report, something to that effect, that this is where we think the SEEP review is going, and we've come up with our initiatives. The other thing, Tanya, getting back to the greenhouse gas inventory, I know that's usually a big thing, but it seems like for Ashland, based on what Stu has presented, it's pretty simple. I don't know if the initiatives would change that much, even if the volume of the numbers have changed. That we're focused on emissions from automobiles and natural gas.
I think Bob had his hand up next.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeff. I think this is a very helpful way of thinking about it, and a very helpful discussion, bringing a lot of threads together. I like the fact that, clarifying our terms, and then also giving us really being clear that when we're talking about a major update of the 2017 SEEP, which was a big community effort, that will require, my guess is, my preference actually on that would be that it would require extensive public engagement and making any change to that. I guess the one thing that I'd like to ask is, we talked about the adaptation piece of it, and I've not thought of that as an update. I've thought of that as an addendum, and I'm wondering if it would be possible to think about, if we prioritize an addendum to this SEEP on adaptation that would not require a full update of the SEEP, but simply an addendum of the SEEP, in order to, try to, rather than open everything up, just have that one piece, which really does seem to be necessary, and that could be very consistent with a CPC determination that the SEEP itself is still what we need at this point with the best information that we've got. But given developments over the last few years, adaptation really does need, its own addendum, a little bit more developed, and working with other commissions that are working on that. It's a question for the group, really, and I guess for Tanya in particular, since kind of her bailiwick.
Yes, and I think that is kind of a separate agenda item, but Gary, you were next up.
Yeah, I would concur with Bob that, we've always recognized that the adaptation section is non-existent or very weak. So that certainly has to be addressed. Relating to the emission inventory, the one thing that was omitted were the emissions from the work in the watershed. And I firmly believe that is a part of our inventory that we've overlooked. So in terms of updating the inventory, that would be a substantial addition to our total emissions, or at least that's my expectation. And then finally, when we talk about the comprehensive review of the current SEEP, the transportation section, in my estimation, is really pretty weak. In fact, unuseful, because it relies upon terms like bicycle and pedestrian friendly. Well, in most people's view, Ashland's already bicycle and pedestrian friendly, but that's not going to get us where we need to go. And until we've made more succinct and measurable goals and implementable policies in the SEEP, we aren't going to make much progress on the transportation sector absent an independent action kind of beyond that, similar to what I've written in terms of the SEEP implementation plan for urban and land use and transportation. So there are 3 areas in my estimation that we really need to be looking to change or add as a part of our effort, however we define that.
Okay, so I'm trying to reach some agreement here, and it sounds like what I'm calling CPC updates are probably we should be calling a review. Tanya?
I think that that's right. If that's what we're talking about owing the council at this point, then I would use that language, the
Okay.
comprehensive review.
Rick?
So to me, that formal requirement ought to be satisfied as part of the CPC update that goes to council in September. It would be, I think.
We would just do
very brief. It would be a paragraph.
Well, and something that says this is what has come from our review.
Right.
Right. And so, yeah, you've asked us to do a comprehensive review and this is our conclusions.
Okay, I think that clarifies that issue. The next one, can we agree that we are not going to do an update of the SEEP this calendar year?
Yes.
Okay. Then
I'm sorry, but we're defining terms here. So I'll be as precise as possible without banging on it too hard. Rather than the term calendar year, what's become clear to me is that the normal cycle for a commission runs from May to May because it's attached to the reappointment cycle. And so the way I'm now seeing this is that each May you elect a new chair and vice chair, and basically their first duty is to prepare to report to council in September, and that's the natural cycle.
Okay, so I would amend that then to this annual cycle, May to May. So no formal SEEP update before May 2022. Gary?
I think that we have an opportunity to, should we choose to wade in, to influence the transportation system plan by advancing policies in the SEEP that can in fact be implemented through the transportation system plan. As I stated earlier, postponing that until after the current update of the transportation system plan will be a lost opportunity for us.
I think we all agree on that, and which leads to the next question is, can we agree on these 5 initiatives or what we call priorities in the past? Formal planning, clean buildings, the path off natural gas, energy efficient transportation, and sustainable electricity. And let me say that the next step after this would be starting to do work planning and who is the lead or co-leads in each one of these initiatives. And we could talk about that at a future meeting. But today we would like to agree on these 5 initiatives.
I think, Gary, you're concerned about not updating the SEEP until May next year because we'd miss opportunity for the transportation system plan. But when are they planning on updating that? And can we provide input without updating the SEEP like we have been doing for all the master plans?
I think it's the SEEP has a very important role in our city. as you noted earlier in the meeting, it is designed to serve as the guiding document for all city actions, whether they be plans or city council actions on land use, as far as that goes. It is intended to be a kind of a context for all the decision making. So having policy in the seat is very different from you or I or anybody else participating and offering input on a particular plan. That turns out to be, the commission's opinion or a member's opinion, but that doesn't make it a part of the seat.
So some of you have probably heard me say this before, but the SEEP it's an aspirational document. It's a wish list. It's not actually a plan. A plan has schedule, resources, who's doing what, and the SEEP is not really a plan. And what I'm proposing and some of the rest of us is that in terms of these initiatives that we're moving into a more formal implementation stage, and we are implementing the SEEP. But Gary, for example, you would be the lead on energy efficient transportation, and you would be driving that. And at some point, if the SEEP sections on transportation need to get updated, that's in your bailiwick. You're the one that would bring that forward very specifically on exactly what changes need to be made in the SEEP.
The goals and policies in what I've written are a much better substitution than what we have now. And without that update to the SEEP, anything almost can conform to what we have now as our guiding document. I think what we have, as you noted, Jeff, is a laundry list of concepts and ideas.
Right.
And until we've restructured that document to provide measurable goals and actionable policies, it's going to be largely worthless. And yes, it was adopted in 2017, but what has happened since that has emanated from the goals or policies that are included in it? Certainly, we haven't made any progress or much on reducing our emissions by 8% per year. That's just, as we've noted, we haven't made probably any progress on that. And that's a measurable outcome that we've failed on. And the reason that we failed on it is because we don't have any actionable policies in the plan that actually move us forward and accomplish that goal.
And I think that's what we want to get out of these initiatives.
Well, that's why we need a SEEP update, is to restructure the document in order to actually get the council on board with those changes. Because without the council's endorsement of policies and goals that will change our trend line, we won't accomplish much with any strategy because we don't have the council's policy authority to move those forward. All we have is our own initiative or creativity as individual citizens working on the CPC.
But won't it move forward quicker through these initiatives rather than a SEEP update?
I don't think so. Let's take, for example, transportation. If we have measurable goals for transportation and actionable policies, and the council were to endorse those, they in fact would be a context and a required context for the development of the transportation system plan, which will come in the coming year and a half. I haven't seen the schedule, but I know that the contractor will come on board probably no later than August or September. So there's an example of where if we had strong explicit policies in the SEEP, we could rely upon that to move things forward. Without that change, let me finish, then we would simply be collaborating with the Citizen Advisory Council that the city forms to advise the plan, the transportation plan update. And we would have essentially one member who, as Jeff might suggest, would be me, but that's one voice. And we don't have the required policies in place to influence the process. We have one person in place to influence the process.
I think, Bob, you had your hand up.
Yeah, well, I mean, Jeff, Gary, you've said a lot. I'm trying to figure out where to dig in first. I have a very different view, I guess. I think in theoretical terms, you know, a unitary, you know, decision from the top on down with something very specific, I could see how that could conceivably be helpful in driving everything that comes underneath it. In, you know, if that were the case, that is almost never the case with any policy initiative. It's all in my experience, and not really in Ashland, but my experience elsewhere, it's at the national level and at, you know, in other international contexts, it's almost always much more a direction, and then there's implementing initiatives that kind of come under that and really flesh it out and provide the real meat. And then sometimes it needs specific initiatives that then come back up to the policy making or the legislative body in this case for decisions. But in many cases can be done by staff, by the executive in this context. So I guess my vision of where we could be most helpful with this is that we have the SEEP, which is the overall policy framework, and I think it's a very useful policy framework, and Jeff's called it somewhat aspirational. It sets out certain goals and areas and foci, but I think it's actually, we can spend our time most usefully fleshing out the individual initiatives underneath that and working with the staff who in the end are the ones that are going to be developing any further implementing policies for city council to the extent that a city council would need to approve it, or incentives and things that that can implement these things through the staff and the city's own mechanisms, and then engaging with community, other community actors where that's necessary. So I think there's a whole lot of latitude that comes with working under a broad policy framework without trying to specify and hammer out in coordinated fashion across a range of items, very, very specific policy language. So my preference and the way I think we have the best chance of moving forward is to take advantage of the broad outlines that are provided by the SEEP, which I think is quite excellent in a lot of respects. It gives a lot of leeway, and then really dig in on those areas where we can make the most difference. And I think the specific initiatives that Jeff has laid out are quite useful in that regard for our own work. So I guess I'd leave it.
Yeah, I might add to that as commissioners, what do we want to be spending our time on? And, you know, as for me, you know, love to dig into, learn a little bit about electric utilities and power contracts, power supply contracts, and natural gas supply contracts, and see how we can, you know, leverage our position as a city and our ownership of an electric utility to move the needle. Those are the kinds of things that I'd like to work on. I'm a lot less interested in going back and, you know, trying to rewrite sections of the SEEP. Tonya.
Given where our emissions are coming from, I think I agree entirely with Gary that this transportation planning process is critical. It's absolutely critical if we are going to get anywhere near our targets. But one of the things I think the SEEP really does well is create those targets. Right, and it's got explicit targets around what we are going to be doing in terms of 2050 and that sort of thing, and I think that could be brought to bear on the conversation around the transportation planning process. We do have transportation elements in the SEEP, of course, but we also have this larger target, and to Gary's point, we haven't made the progress we need to make, and we cannot make that with transportation moving on the way it has always been. We need significant, urgent changes in how we look at transportation and how we make it move. And so, but it feels to me like we have the foundation from which to do that work through the transportation planning process. And I know, Gary, that we'll have somebody on, I think that's the Citizens Advisory Committee, right? We'll have somebody there, but we will still be a commission during all of that. And we can still say what we think needs to happen with that critically important planning process. And the work that has been done in terms of looking at SEEP and figuring out, well, what are the targets we need to look at for transportation is, I think, a fantastic foundation from which to do the work that we want to do with the transportation planning process. That thinking doesn't go to waste because we use it as a way to frame and filter the comments that we make as a commission. I think that there's a couple of sort of points of how we enter that. But I would expect that if we dive into one element and say we want to update this one particular element, I think this community is going to require significant community engagement. And so then that becomes a question of, do we spend our time doing that, or do we spend our time, kind of crafting the approach to the transportation planning process, right? That kind of brings in what we already have and leverages that. But I think, when I look at the 5 initiatives that you've put forward, Jeff, because of the transportation planning process, it's absolutely critical that one of those 5 be energy efficient transportation. Right, there is an opportunity now. These planning processes don't come along every year, and we have to make the very best use of this process as we can from a climate perspective. But I think we can do that by doing sort of the comprehensive review we've talked about, and then leveraging the tools we have, that we already have, that we don't. I don't think we have to go add to the toolbox necessarily with prescriptive policy elements. But we do have to make a smart use of the other elements, and it is very important that we are working hand in glove with the Transportation Commission.
Okay.
So I'd like to interject here for a second. I appreciate, Gary, that you'd like something that has more force of law is not quite the right word, but it's along those lines. I don't see how that can happen in a practical sense. And I also think that were we to engage in that process with the obvious intent of forcing the other members on the CAC to deal with those constraints, that would set a bad tone for the whole thing. And so politically, I believe that we should not go down that road. What we need to do is to dig in and provide, which you have done a great job of. There's still some refinement that needs to be done. Provide all the outside experience and the technical background and basically all the convincing arguments for the position that you've been advocating for. Over the last 5 months, you've continued to educate me, and I've understood much better how mode shift has actually been achieved in other places. The benefits of it, that you have listed, And I believe that approach is the one that can actually be effective in this town at this time. The other approach that I think you're suggesting is just not going to work.
Well, that's usually something that you learn by engaging with the public, not accepting one or even several people's opinions. I think, as a commission, we need to figure out what it is that needs to happen in order to accomplish the goal that we have accepted as articulated in the seat. And as a commission, one of the easiest ways for us to demonstrate our commitment to that is to move forward with changes to the SEEP that document and articulate what those changes need to be. I fully appreciate that you don't get there 0 to 60 by not engaging the public, but I think we have a responsibility to begin that education process, and the only vehicle that we really have to pursue that educational and engagement process is a formal SEEP update. We certainly can take initiatives to inform ourselves as members of the SEEP, but fully engaging the public, I think, would be a way to elevate the overall understanding of the community of the challenges. It could be that the community comes back and says the SEEP goal is all wrong, and you guys are off on the wrong foot here because we don't accept the realities of the changes that you suggest are needed. And at that point, we would go back and look at the SEEP goal and figure out what is realistic given the public's willingness to change, and the city's willingness to make investments to bring change about. This is, none of us agree. All of us agree that this is difficult work, but how to get there is the essential decision that we have to make.
I agree with that, but I don't think that the formal public outreach process that was employed in developing SEEP is the only way to do it. It is a way of doing it. I don't think it's actually available for us right now. That employed paid consultants. It took a year and a half, 2 years, something like that. And as you pointed out, the transportation system plan is going to be done by then. So I think that the more informal approaches that were laid out, and when is actually another agenda item, we're obviously blowing our agenda tonight entirely, but that's because I want to stay focused on this and actually get to a decision, because I think it's majorly impacting our productivity. And so the other agenda item that I think has potential of majorly impacting our productivity is how we're going to deal with engagement and outreach. And so I think there are other possibilities. I think the one that you've laid out is one that in a more perfect world, I would like to employ, but I don't actually think it's available to us this year. And it has no chance, even if we're available, of being done in time to influence the transportation system plan.
I might add that, Gary, in terms of transportation, you're probably a little further ahead of us in most of these other areas. And so you're, I certainly recognize that maybe you feel like your area is kind of ripe for that type of engagement and involvement, but some of the other areas like electrification, for example, we're not there yet.
Yeah, Gary, I'd also add that I don't think we're saying we won't ever update the SEEP. We just don't have it in our bandwidth to do it through next May. And I would, as part of our review, is a recommendation on updates. So I think you can work on that in parallel if you want, on a list of items you think of how the transportation focus area, the SEEP should be changed. And when we get to a point where we do make the updates, that would be available.
So Rick,
What do we need? Do we need something in order to bring this? Because I'm also mindful of the time here, and I think we've got some. What do we need in order to bring this to a conclusion?
well, at least on my list, the open question is, can we all agree on these 5 initiatives? Do you want me to run through them again?
Yes,
Yes,
please.
no.
Yes, please.
Number 1, formal planning. Number 2, clean buildings. Number 3, the path off natural gas. Number 4, energy efficient transportation. And number 5, sustainable electricity. Those are our priorities. Those are our initiatives. Gary?
I think adaptation has to be on there.
So I would defer to Rick on that. We had it on there and it didn't make the cut. So Rick?
I, as part of my review of what we've done since last August, have concluded that we are so constrained, and I don't want to enumerate all the ways we're constrained again, unless somebody feels that's productive, that even doing those 5 things is going to be a real stretch for us. And one of the reasons that I had intended to do the adaptation agenda item before this discussion is so that we could level set on where things are. So at this point, all I can do is give you my personal belief. It's obviously not what the commission has decided. Adaptation is probably the most important thing for a small town like Ashland to be doing. My assessment is that it's so important. There are already other bodies like the Wildfire Safety Commission. There's people working on housing. And if you go through all the things that are in the packet items for the adaptation agenda item tonight, it's not complete. There's still things that need to be done, but there is a massive effort out there to address what in my mind are the most important ones. And so my assessment is that the things that did make the cut, that are in the list of 5, CPC is more uniquely positioned to have a big impact on, whereas the adaptation piece, there is significant work that CPC ought to be doing in a more perfect world, but those things are already being addressed by other bodies without this commission basically doing anything.
Tonya?
We may be kind of getting that next agenda item into the mix here and handling it all in one fell swoop. But one of the concerns that I have is that we do have a vulnerability assessment that was done as part of the planning process. And what we have not done, which is typical in adaptation planning processes, is to kind of go down vulnerability by vulnerability and identify what actions are going to be taken. So clearly, wildfire is a huge issue. And we have a Wildfire Safety Commission, Ashland Fire and Rescue are on top of that, and they're working very hard. We've got some questions maybe around flooding, and I've started asking Scott Fleury about particularly downtown flooding related to changing climate conditions. We had floods even before we had some of the visible changing climate conditions. We also have things like smoke and the impact on the economy. Those are all things that are part and parcel of adaptation. But again, the economic development work that we're doing may very well be where that should be handled. What I'm wondering is if in our, and make sure I get this wording right, in our comprehensive update, we may be speaking to some adaptation elements that need to be addressed going forward. And so maybe what I would like to do is spend some time, and I wouldn't mind, taking the lead on this particular element, but to spend some time with that vulnerability assessment and make sure that we feel like the primary vulnerabilities are in fact being addressed through other processes. And if they're not, then we can take that to the council as part of the review and say, this is a hole that we think is something that we should be looking to figure out how to address potentially before the next major update. But I think that sort of that assessment that of actually going through it, I think is something that we should do. But again, I would be happy to take the lead on that. And I don't think it's all that complicated, because what we're actually looking for is it being handled? Are these specific vulnerabilities being handled adequately? Which is different than doing a full-blown planning process or taking on a bunch of those elements ourselves, which I think is too much for this commission at the moment.
I think I would agree with that, Tanya. In addition to adaptation, we've got the last item, engagement and educational outreach. So to me, that's a similar item that it doesn't make our list of the 5, but we want to make sure it's being handled across the commissions or somewhere else in the community.
I guess, Chris, you're the only one that hasn't weighed in. If you have any thoughts we should take into account.
I think I'm in general consensus here, Jeff, with the items you've outlined. I do agree that I think adaptability is a critical component of that, but I do feel it's something that we can realize in essence among each of those aspects that you've brought to the table. I think adaptability is also a kind of universal in a sense that I think we can seek to employ in each of these said specific goals of our commission.
Okay, thanks. So Rick, the last question was what the reporting or this review looks like. And I think we can kind of think about that and kick that forward since into the next meeting.
Okay.
Sorry.
I want to be sure we're getting crisp decisions here. And so you've gone through these 5 questions and we've gone all over the place. I feel like before we move on from this, I personally want to know whether everybody's really agreed to the thing. You stated them as, do you agree? If there's anybody that wants to say no to any of those, aside from the SEEP update one, because I think Gary is still in a position where he doesn't understand, but there's 4 other things. And one of them was just the list of initiatives. And there's some terminology ones. And I'd like for you to go through all the other 4 and be sure that everybody's agreed to that. And because if not, that will inform what we need to do for the next agenda for the next meeting.
Okay. So number 1 is define the term SEEP update to mean a formal written update of the climate energy action plan that would require at a minimum council approval. Okay, the second one was, can we agree to use the term CPC update or review for any interim CPC reporting in written or verbal presentations to the council? Ray?
Sorry.
Yeah, Ray, you're muted.
No, I'm fine with it.
Okay. So the next one, number 3 was, can we agree that CPC will provide a CPC update or comprehensive review this year to the council, but not a SEEP update?
Okay, so all I'm hearing is that Gary does not agree with that. And the majority has agreed with that. And Gary, I'd like to talk with you about that offline some more. But for right now, we're just going to have to go with the majority moving this forward.
That's,
Okay, and
that's
I'm,
what you do.
I would add a clarification about the, when we're talking about year, it's the May to May year, not the calendar year.
And Jeff,
Yes.
Jeff, I would just suggest that in that particular line that we don't use the word CPC update at all, that we call it just a comprehensive review.
Okay,
And that'll help us be clear about what it is we're trying to keep those terminology elements clear.
okay, great. I'm sure Elizabeth is all over that for the minutes. Okay, number 4 was basically agree on these 5 initiatives: formal planning, clean buildings, path off natural gas, energy efficient transportation, and sustainable electricity.
I have one comment, sorry. Where does equity fit in? I think that, like adaptation, we need to blend that with those 5 subject areas to ensure that we're covering that issue.
That's a very, very good point. I think we can all agree to that.
Yeah, it should be part and parcel of all 5 of those.
Yes, it's universal. Everything we do has to have an equity lens.
Okay, thanks for that, Gary. So are
So
we
we
in
should
agreement?
just let's make sure that we say that in there. So in anything that we write, we should just make sure we say it, even though it's understood. Yeah.
Okay.
thanks.
So are we in agreement on these 5 initiatives? Okay, great. And the 5th question was, can we agree to prepare a high-level document this summer called a CPC update that includes short summaries of the 6 initiatives? And it will be supported by working documents or notes as and updated as necessary.
Well, although I think we're at 5 now.
Yes, sorry, 5. So basically prepare a high-level document with summaries on each of these 5 initiatives this summer. Okay, I'm done, Rick.
Thank you. Okay.
Do I still get my agenda item?
No, I can answer that one. So my intent, because you had an agenda item and you have said that you don't necessarily agree with dropping adaptation, is to bring that back at the next meeting.
Yeah, that's fine.
So now let me think, where are we?
One question on tasks. Tanya, you agreed to work through the vulnerability assessment and identify current deficiencies. Is that a task I can list?
I think it kind of depends on what the group decides to do with that with that assessment. So we probably would hold that off until the next meeting.
Okay, so we have a 1/2 hour. I would like to just go to the engagement and outreach strategy, because there is a fair amount of documents that I presume that you all have in your head right now. Right, so this is the one where Gary supplied a public engagement matrix, and there is a new document from a set of 5 folks that brought forward the May letter last meeting. And then I also repeated that same document from last May, just to be sure that context was set for anybody that happened to be looking at the packet and didn't have that readily accessible. Gary sent that matrix, and it caused me to think about things, because up until I saw that matrix, there were only 2 options. There was the really heavyweight formal process that's typically done by hiring a consultant and doing community meetings, surveys, and all that sort of stuff. Or there were the 3 options that were presented in the memo to the commission in May. Gary has suggested that there are intermediate positions between those two options. And so I think what would be most educational for me, and I don't know about the rest of the commission, so if you think there's a different way to handle this agenda item with the amount of time that we have left, speak up. But I think it would be useful for Gary to lead us through his matrix to sort of fill out what the options are for this topic. And then, time permitting, hearing any comments that the commission has on both of the memos that have been prepared by those 5 folks is the way I'm proposing we handle this agenda item right now. Is there any objection to that process for tonight?
Well, obviously there's any number of ways to engage the public, and that engagement can vary widely. I mean, we've all been through different public involvement processes. I mean, we participate in the city's online survey as an example of one way to solicit the public input. I'm simply suggesting that we have all sorts of intermediate approaches that we decide as a commission, not only the issue at hand and the policy direction that we think the council should adopt, but also identifying the appropriate engagement tool to use to advance that forward. It seems pretty straightforward, and unless there's other discussion about that general approach to community involvement, I don't think we need to discuss it anymore. You know, if we come up with a particular strategy that we want to move forward to council, we'll simultaneously talk about what kind of engagement process we need to initiate in order to provide sufficient justification to the council that we've done our homework, basically. I mean, community engagement is all about homework, making sure that the policy recommendation you have fits reasonably well with the community's understanding of the issues and the steps that need to be taken to address it. So it seems pretty straightforward to me. Are there questions on that? Yeah, Jeff.
I was wondering about social media, and I know as a quasi-governmental entity, there's lots of constraints there, but it wasn't on your list in terms of emails or Facebook groups or anything like that.
I think there was a footnote at the bottom of the table that suggested it is important to note that all of the above would be complemented by both digital and traditional media outreach. So I think that is addressed. That's a simple tool, one that most, that everyone's familiar with and offers some opportunity to gain feedback, albeit it's risky because you can easily be overwhelmed by an organized group who in essence decides to either advance or object to whatever you're doing. But nonetheless, it's got to be a part of what we do, in my estimation, in the current era.
So I'm not sure this is an answerable question, but as I stare at the table and I'm scratching my head, down at the bottom where it says sustained public engagement, I'm imagining that would be typically done along the lines that the SEEP was originally done, meaning you have, it's a burdensome enough thing that typically the city hires a consultant in order to do all the background work and make things happen. Is that fair?
I think you'll be surprised. My expectation, given the discussion that we had at the last meeting, would be that process would be largely undertaken by the Ashland Climate Coalition, that we would explore that issue through that process, because again, we're in large part trying to build community consensus, or at least passive agreement that whatever we need to do is reasonable. And that's the threshold that we need to achieve through whatever method of community and civic engagement that we decide upon. It could be that we, as an example, we decide to move forward to the council a ban on the commercial landscapers' use of gas-powered blowers. We engage with the stakeholders. As it turns out, nobody thinks that's a good idea among the stakeholders. And we have to back up and say, well, if the stakeholders don't agree, then what does the community think about that? And undertake a slightly different community involvement process. But if the stakeholders said, yeah, as long as everybody's got to operate with the same rules, we're okay going to electric blowers. And if that were the case, then we could move it forward to council. If that weren't, we would probably want to do some other work to explore what the community as a whole thinks about that issue. And again, it could be a simple survey with the city's engagement tool or other methods. Again, this is, in my estimation, community involvement is a fluid process, one that you try something. If it works, great. If it feels like it provides the context and the information that you need to move forward, then that's fine. If it doesn't, then you need to either expand the engagement or refine the policy or recommendation, whatever it might be, to reflect the engagement that you've received.
Well, that was a very interesting response. It was not what I was expecting. So what that suggests to me is that from top to bottom, the method of implementing it is orthogonal to what you're trying to represent in this table. Is that fair?
Explain that, ask that question in a different way.
One could imagine hiring the consultant approach, and one could imagine that the coalition has been stood up and is amazingly successful, and that either of those methods would apply across this whole table.
My expectation is that only the last one, the sustained public engagement, would be something that would require the hiring of a consultant. In my experience, public workshops are pretty straightforward and just require knowledgeable people engaging with people who attend the workshop. Each of us as members of the CPC would be highly knowledgeable on the topic. Yes, we may not know everything, and somebody may ask a question that we would have to say, well, we'll do some more research and get back to you. But ostensibly, only the latter, the sustained public engagement, would require either a consultant or the coalition to move forward. At least, that's my kind of perspective on what's needed and how sophisticated it is.
Yeah, that was really helpful refinement, and is consistent with your earlier statement of things being fairly fluid and context dependent, and it just depends on what you're trying to achieve.
All right.
Bob?
Yeah, no, I think that was, thanks, Gary, for walking us through that table. I was a little skeptical of spending time on it in this meeting when Vic suggested it, but it was super helpful. And I think that particularly that last little piece, I think was very helpful. To me, the proposal of community coalition, once we have a community coalition that's really kind of organized, it can really take on a lot of the engagement tasks and responsibility and momentum that otherwise has to rely on, hiring a specialized consultant, or depending on intensive staff time to do it, because the other alternative we didn't really talk about is you hire a consultant when you don't have any of the, you don't have enough staff resources to do it. Consultant. That's what happens. So that was very helpful. So thank you very much for putting this together and for laying out the examples as well. Do we want to talk about the rest of the memo, or is this?
I
or
do.
is there not need
I want to set a little bit more context though
Okay.
before we move on.
And can I just knowing, I'm sorry, one thing, Rick, I just want to, I hope that we can preserve wall off just 2 minutes or 5 minutes at the end, because Stu was not here. And we did have a conversation, Tanya mentioned about the authorization for the USDA program. So let's just hear from him, make sure that we don't lose that at the end. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Okay, so the context that I wanted to set is what it is that's being asked of the commission tonight. In my mind, everything has been laid out for how we do the outreach and engagement and that sort of thing in the 2 memos that have been brought forward, or for that matter, the matrix that Gary's presented as well. I want to pursue basically all of those possibilities, because it is critical that we find some way to do this that we can afford. And I don't mean that in terms of just budget. I mean in terms of the impact on this commission or the other commissions or on the community. But specifically tonight, it's this commission. I don't think that those memos imply that this commission is going to take on yet another burden. Instead, what's being asked is, if this thing were to appear, would the commission support it? Most specifically, my expectation would be that at least the chair and perhaps the vice chair and on occasion topic experts would come to coalition meetings. As the current chair, I can commit that I'm willing to go to the coalition meetings, but that's kind of an odd position to be in, because what I would like is for the commission to say that the chair is always going to do that. And when I forgot to mention during the election, you all need to be figuring out who's going to run this thing, who's going to be the chair, who's going to the vice chair. I can't be either one of those at the next May election. And so I can still be on the commission, but I cannot be in either of those positions as of May of 2022. So anyway, backing up to the topic that's actually at hand, I think we would like for the commission to ask questions about what this coalition thing means, but it's not just restricted to the coalition. The thing that Tanya had put forward with the CERT and that path to outreach, all those things are on the table, and I want to continue to pursue all of them simultaneously, as long as it doesn't impact the commission, and that hopefully one of them will flower, because my assessment is that we need to relieve the burden on this commission so that it can do the things that only it can do. So I just wanted to set that context about what it is that you're actually being asked tonight. And then I just want to open up for questions. I don't want to, somebody feels like it's helpful because they're an oral learner rather than somebody that learns a lot from pages. And, we each have our own specific ways of learning things. If that's useful, I'm happy to do that. But my preference would be, given the limited amount of time that's left, is if there's any specific questions that you felt were not answered by the memo, we can attempt to answer them quickly, or perhaps more importantly, given the very limited time that's left, we just write them down and we'll come back to you again with more information about what we're thinking. So now I should stop talking and listen. Anya.
Yes. So Rick, it seems like what we're asking on kind of both of these is the commission good with us continuing to go forward and explore this? So in terms of the coalition, that idea and that working group that's gotten together to talk about how that might form, are we good carrying forward with that work? On the same level, with the idea of the climate resilient Ashland kind of coordinated outreach and engagement campaign, that's moving forward too. A very similar group of people has continued to move that conversation forward, and we're waiting to hear back from what the CCOC folks are thinking, because they would have a significant role in it, much larger than CPC's if it goes forward. But I think what we're asking, Rick, or what you're asking is the commission, how is the commission feeling about us continuing to work to develop those two aspects to see if we can get at least one or both of them to fly? Is that what you're, and sharing, of course, the latest details on how the coalition conversation is shaping up? Is that right?
That's primarily it. And that's probably all we have time for tonight. At some point, the notion that this commission has committed to participating in the coalition would also be helpful. Jeff?
I support the general approach. It gives us a venue that when we have made significant progress on, something like the electric utility contract, and we're looking at different options and stuff, this is a venue that we could go and talk to the community about those sorts of things and get some informal feedback and ideas. So I think it's great, because otherwise we would be working in our little silos, talking to just a few people like Stu and Tom at the utility.
Yeah, I want to add my voice. I think it's a terrific development for these things to come into being, and the faster they can come into being, the better. It is something for us that will just make our task a lot easier. And if there's anything that the commission could do to facilitate it, I think we should do that without taking on the burden of convening it or any of those kinds of things, of course. But anything that we could do to facilitate it, to engage with it, I think is I'd be in support of. And Godspeed, if you can say that in the public forum.
Ray?
And so I think you're also want to keep all the options open, right? From the traditional government to the intercommission to the community coalition, whatever it takes, and try to develop all three.
Yeah, I think I agree with Gary's fluid statement entirely.
Okay.
Yeah. At this point, Rick, since you're willing to attend coalition meetings, assuming that it gets lifted, if this commission's sort of commitment to that would help to develop it, I would be, willing to kind of put that on the table today. If you think that commitment would help.
If the commission's ready to do that, that would be wonderful.
I'm ready. I don't know if you need a formal motion or something, but
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Because it's just what I do. I just don't want to walk out on the limb and then get it cut off.
No, I agree, and I would agree to attend some of these meetings as well.
Same for me.
Yeah,
Bob?
I think we should formalize it. We should just say that this is something that it is a task, because as you pointed out, Rick, you've got another year in that role. Let's make it something that the commission commits the chair to participate in, and then others participants as necessary on subject matter. So I move that with respect to the coalition, and I agree with everything that everybody said, that there are all these other forms of engagement are still on the table and still should be used. They're tools, but the coalition is something that doesn't quite exist yet and is trying to gel. I move that the chair participate formally in any kinds of efforts to stand up the coalition and help its work forward, regardless of who's in that chair.
Is there a
I'll
second?
second.
Any further discussion?
I would amend that to say the chair or his representative, because the chair is not always available.
Yep. I amend. Well, I don't know. I have to.
Yeah, we got the idea.
We got the idea.
You can do this right. Okay, so I think there's a motion as amended. Is there any further discussion? All in favor? Unanimous? Okay, well, that's actually all I wanted to accomplish tonight. If there are any further questions about the coalition, please don't hesitate to send them our way. And so I would like to pull Stu into the conversation now. Stu, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
I can. I think the question that Bob was suggesting, and I certainly agree with, is commentary on the USDA thing, and certainly if you need anything from this commission.
Yes. I was hoping to have a minute to talk about that, so thank you. Basically, I have been chipping away at this home energy loan program for the last several years, different forms of it, and we brought Bob and I brought the most recently revised version not too long ago, and just after that, I got a notice from the USDA that we had 90 days to basically submit a formal application for the letter of interest that we submitted a year ago. And so I've been scurrying away trying to put together this loan application, and of course, we didn't have a lot of time, but I've finally got the mostly final version of that, and it's going straight to council because we need a resolution adopted to authorize the program, essentially, and that's part of what we need to submit to the USDA. So if you are interested, you can get into the next packet for the council and look through all the different pieces of the loan application. I think the short version is, for me, this is a really unmatched opportunity for the city to improve existing buildings and to really substantially inject money into projects that wouldn't happen otherwise. And we can do that at basically no to minimal costs to the city, besides changing some operational things. I don't need anything in particular from this commission because you folks already endorsed the program idea back when it was the thing Bob and I presented to you. And I think that we're in a pretty good position. So I'll be very curious to see what happens. We may have somebody from the commission join us at the meeting, but I'll have to double check and see how they're going to run that part of the meeting. It might be very quick. Are there any questions briefly?
Is it, one question for me, would it be helpful, Stu, do you think, since I think a number of counselors will not have had any experience with this, you know, they haven't been part of those earlier conversations. Is there any role that you would see for commissioners in terms of just education for counselors? I mean, we're all generalists, and then things like this come to us and we need to do these deeper dives. Or do you feel like that there's a solid enough sort of general understanding at the council that extra effort's not needed by individual commission members?
You know, I think that a little extra endorsement from community stakeholders never hurts. I think that the council communication I put together is pretty short and to the point, and I think it should stand pretty well on its own. But, you know, I think it might be helpful to have some outreach conducted. If people are interested in doing that, I think, at this point, it would probably be best if it was just at a citizen level or from, members of a commission. But that's, I think, for you folks to decide.
Yeah, well, there was a decision earlier tonight, I think, to have Rick draft a formal support letter for this. Was that correct? Yeah, so, and I think that that's helpful. I think it's always good for the council to know how our commissions that are related to a particular issue stand on that. I think that that'll be a helpful piece.
Right. So
Yeah,
in summary, what I'm planning to say is basically this is an amazing opportunity and you've absolutely got to do this.
Yeah, that's
Um,
accurate. And since you folks had that discussion earlier, that's great.
Yeah, we didn't talk about the specifics of what that would include. I have some suggestions of zero cost to the city, for affordability, all the things that we've been talking about when we talk.
If you want to send me a draft that I just rubber stamp, go for it.
I'll send you some notes.
Thank you. Okay. Anything else? And we kind of missed you at the beginning, Stu. We have a few more minutes. If Bridget stood in for you on a couple of things. What was it? Oh, the induction cooktop, and there was general thumbs up on the new climate pages, and then there was the USDA thing. But if there's anything beyond those three things, you've got a few minutes if you want them.
Yeah, great. My apologies for missing out here and having to be on the phone. Some technical difficulties today. Let's see. I think one other thing I'd like to highlight that I think is coming up pretty soon is we are participating in a grant to basically put a self-serve ride and drive electric vehicle out in the community. And so that grant was approved, and we've set aside funds previously to make that happen. So hopefully, mid to late summer, we'll be having more to say about that. But the idea would be there's just a car there that anybody in the community can reserve for free to go for a test drive. So that's kind of interesting and fun. I've been spending so much time on the RESP application that I really haven't got much updates on other things besides the new programs that Bridget spoke to already. We're really excited about the induction cooktop incentive, and we hope it goes smoothly.
Okay, very good. Tanya?
Just wanted to quickly let you all know that I heard back from Adam. I asked him about the DLCD rulemaking requirement, and that does have to come back to council. So we can kind of answer that question now and know what the path is for that set of comments.
Okay, well, I will follow up on that. Okay, is there anything else? You've got about 2 minutes if anybody else wants to say something. Otherwise, we can call it a night. I think we're pretty much done with what we can do for the night. And the agenda didn't go as expected, but I'm very grateful to you all for coming together on it. Ray?
Yeah, Rick, I think based on the outcome of this meeting, you had some proposals of the short timeline for our presentation in September. So I imagine you'll follow up with a note on that.
Well, yeah, but let me just, minutes that are left.
Okay.
Thanks for reminding me. What I would like to do is for the CPC update, which is basically the annual report to council. I think that Jeff and I ought to put together a proposal for the next meeting, and I am proposing that Gary and Chris be reviewing that prior to the next meeting. So, we still have the public meeting requirement thing. And so we would bring that draft in July. And then there would be another spin, and I would hope in August it would just be approved, or at least approved with minor modifications. because the presentation in September is before the September meeting. So that's the rough outline of how I'm anticipating moving forward on that item. Okay, if there are no further questions, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.